Hey, what's up my friends? It's Shamrock here with another boss guide for you. This is for the Blight of Galakrond, which is the third boss in the Galakrond's Fall dungeon. This is for specifically a 26 Tyrannical, and this is actually probably one of the cleanest times I've ever seen this boss be run in the last 4 weeks or however long the season's been out. So yeah, this is a great example of how this boss should go. Like, this was almost nearly perfect, and there were no deaths, which is really nice. I actually think I have the perfect build for all of Galakrond's Fall, like that entire dungeon. This, especially for a Tyrannical week, like this build just works so nicely. Unfortunately, you are not running any of the DPS talents, so there's no Stormkeeper, no Lava Surge, no Master of the Elements. However, this key is probably one of the most generous when it comes to timers, so you do not need that extra DPS. All you need to do is keep your group alive, and you are golden. So with that being said, I'll just point out a few things. So on the left side of the tree, I do have the Plains Traveler talent, which is going to reduce the cooldown of your Astral Shift. This is very important for, I mean, honestly, all of the bosses, but it's extra important for the last boss, and you'll know exactly why if you go and watch my Galakrond video. I might actually upload another one though, because the 26 I just ran, once again, was super clean. It kind of just proves that the build that I had for the last one, the 25, works super well. Moving down, I have 2 points into Elemental Warding. You don't really need any utility for this dungeon at all, especially on a Tyrannical week. So this 4% magic damage reduction is really going to be helpful for you for all of the bosses. The 2nd, 3rd, and 4th specifically do chunks of magic damage, and so that's just going to help you have a little bit more survivability. I also have Mana Spring talented here. It's kind of useless throughout a dungeon, but there's no other place, in my opinion, to put this point. I mean, technically you could put it into Totemic Recall if you wanted to, but I don't see a lot of value there. So yeah, I do put this one into Mana Spring. It's just going to help with the last boss, because that is a very taxing fight. It's kind of like a marathon, so you just need to use all of the tools you have available to make sure your mana doesn't run out before the fight's over. Moving on to the right side of the tree, just a few things I'll point out. I'm running Spirit Walker's Tidal Totem. This is it's an amazing cooldown I'm finding so far for the Tyrannical dungeons this season, and it also helps because we are a little bit more mana taxed now with this season compared to last, because we don't have shocks anymore, and also of the changes for the mana that they made. It also just gives you a nice little throughput cooldown as well. It's like an extra mini cooldown, which is perfect. You'll see. I use it on this boss during the winds phase, which is great. It's also useful on the 2nd boss, and it's also useful on the 3rd boss. So I would definitely say run this talent for Galakrond's Fall and Tyrannical. I also have Current Control. This is going to reduce the cooldown of Healing Tide Totem. This is actually really useful in this dungeon as well. It's going to give you an extra Healing Tide on the majority of the bosses if you use it early. And it's especially useful for the last boss as well, because you're going to get it basically back-to-back shield phases, or maybe like every other. I'm not sure, but either way, it seems very useful in the ones that I've run. So with that being said, let's move on to the actual boss itself. So this fight could be kind of chaotic. It kind of depends on how well your DPS pass the debuff to the tank, and vice versa, in order to minimize the amount of damage that people are taking, because the scariest part of this fight, I think, is when somebody gets the dot, and then if they pass it around between the DPS, because the initial tick of the corrosion is insane. It's like 600k on higher keys, so you just need to be ready for that. So I do have a few tips for this boss. The first one is to download this weak aura that I will put in the I'll put in the description for this video. So this weak aura basically shows you ahead of time what's being, like, who in your group is being targeted. It actually works in a lot of dungeons and for most abilities, so it could be annoying for you. You may want to turn it off when you're not doing this boss, but when you are, it's really useful for this boss, because you can see exactly who's getting targeted with the corrosive or with the corrosion, and then you can prep to heal them right away. So first tip for this boss is, as soon as you see somebody getting targeted with corrosion, immediately begin to cast a Healing Surge on them. You're going to see the swirlies appear underneath your feet. Trust me, I've tested this. You are always going to have time to get your Healing Surge off on that person before the swirlies actually hit the ground. So Healing Surge that person, follow it up with a Riptide right off the heels of the cooldown of the GCD, and then move out of the swirly, and that person should be safe. If you try to move before you actually heal them, there's a good chance on a higher key that they might die, especially if they don't have a defensive. So just be careful with that. So for this first phase, whoever gets the corrosion debuff should just give it to the tank immediately, and then they will get rid of it with with the cone that the boss does, the frontal. If you happen to get it in phase 1, don't waste any DRs on it, just because you're going to need them more for the second phase. Second phase is a little bit harder. So whoever gets the debuff this time, there's 2 ways to do it. Is they either have to pop a defensive and hold it until about halfway through the winds phase, and then they can give it to the tank, or they can give it to the tank right away. It just means the tank will have to pass it back to a DPS either at the end of the winds or right after the winds, and then take it back again for the breath. So thankfully this group is pretty good at coordinating that. But other than that, as a healer, you're going to be doing that same tip, the same first tip from phase 1 is as soon as you see somebody get targeted with that corrosion, you're going to immediately put a healing surge with a Riptide on them. Next for phase 2, you're just going to have to probably cycle through about 3 phases of wind, maybe 2 if you're using Lust in this phase. So if you're getting 3 phases, what I do is for the first phase, I will normally pop Spirit Walker's Grace, and then with the Cloudburst Totem down right before the winds go out, get Riptides on everybody, Primordial Wave beforehand if you can, and then just rip some Chain Heals and your Primordial Wave Cleaves during the winds, and that should be enough to at least keep everybody up. If anybody gets low towards the winds, or towards the end of the winds, just pop your Cloudburst Totem, and that should give everybody enough boost of health so that they're not dying. If anybody is holding on to the debuff during the winds, the corrosion, just make sure you're focusing them with a little bit more extra single target, usually in the form of Healing Surge. For the second set of winds, and you'll see I'm actually a little bit discombobulated here because I didn't pop Spirit Walker's Grace in the first one, and if I remember correctly, it's because I, for some reason, spazzed out and I couldn't find my mouse, so I just couldn't click the right button combination to do it. So I kind of just went at it natty, but anyways, yeah. So I would use Spirit Walker's Grace, then I would use Ancestral Guidance, and then I would use Manatide Totem. Actually, so I did use Mana Totem here for that second one, and that is with the Spirit Walker's Grace, or sorry, Spirit Walker's Tidal Totem talent, which basically turns Manatide into a nice little cooldown because you can just spam healing waves and chain heals very quickly and fill up your Cloudburst. So that's what I did for the second one. For the third one, I'm going to be popping Ancestral Guidance. So you can either do that, you can swap the order of that if you wanted to. All I would say is that for the first one, if things are relatively calm, because they usually are in the first one, don't pop anything more than Spirit Walker's Grace, because you want to have cooldowns for the next 2. And then using only Ancestral Guidance during this phase, you'll have Ancestral Guidance up for the third phase at some point, as well as all of your other cooldowns. If you need to, I would say popping a Healing Tide Totem is probably your way to go, especially if you're using my build and you have current control. Popping Healing Tide Totem somewhere in the second phase, you'll probably get it up towards the end of the third phase as well. All right, and that should be good for the second phase. Moving into the third phase, you're pretty much set, because if you're using the healing method that I'm doing, you're going to have all of your cooldowns, which is great. So you can kind of just sort of cycle through them. Usually the first one I'll do is either Ascendance or Healing Tide Totem. I try to save Slink for if somebody is getting, if somebody is about to take the debuff and they don't have any defenses, or if I see somebody have the debuff and they get really low, that's usually when I'll pop Slink, because it is the perfect tool for getting someone from like 10% health to almost full health. And that is usually what happens here with these dots, if they get passed around, either unintentionally or intentionally. What the tank should be doing here is he should be holding on to the debuff for as long as he can, then passing it to somebody, preferably somebody who has some sort of defensive, and then they pass it back to the tank right away. And that just basically happens for the entire duration of the third phase. Other than that, you sometimes will get ice spiked, so you just need to be careful. And you'll see here, I just popped the Slink there because that person got to like 10% health. I think they actually would have been okay without the Slink, but you don't want to take any chances. Having a death here, especially if you don't have any B-reses, but even if you do, is going to set you a little bit behind. And if you fall behind in this fight, it's easy to just start sort of like dropping off like flies. People just start dying. So yeah, don't wait and hold your Slink. Like if you see an emergency, just pop it. And then, like I said, you have the rest of your throughput cooldowns anyways to get through this phase. So I've popped Healing Tide, I've popped Slink, now I have Ascendance, and I just popped it. No, actually I didn't pop it there, but I'm about to pop it soon. Don't hold on to your cooldowns this phase. If you find yourself falling a little bit behind from these noxious ejections, which is just the spits that the one dragon does, don't let yourself fall behind, because if somebody takes the debuff and they're at 80-70% from one of the ejections, they might die. So use your cooldowns here to just keep everybody as topped as possible throughout the entire phase. And you'll see I did just pop Ascendance right there, and then I'll have Ancestral Guidance back up at the very end as well. Throughout this, once again, you're going to be watching the ice spikes if you get them. Hopefully your DPS breaks you out. The The fear is if they don't break you out, you could then get the fire breath on you, and if you're still Knife Spike, then you really can't do anything. So it is something the DPS should be prioritizing. And then for you, on that note, with the fire breath, just make sure you're watching where the fire dragon is at all times, because he could sneak up and breathe on you, and it will kill you in about 2 ticks. I think you can survive 1. So just be careful. And if you have the debuff, or if you have the cold spike and you take the fire breath, you're probably going to die. So just make sure you're watching where that guy is at all times. But yeah, so like I said, this is probably one of the cleanest runs I've seen this season so far with this boss. I was very impressed. We actually weren't on comms or anything. This was just a group who sort of, I guess we were like in the flow, so we knew what we were doing. Everybody made smart decisions, so it was really well played. And then yeah, so that healing, everything I just described with my healing there, is what I would do every single time I do this fight. It works like a charm. The only time I ever fail at this fight is when DPS or the tank is like passing around the dot without thinking, accidentally. If the DPS passes it to another and then passes it to another, all of your DPS are then at like 20% HP, and it can basically wipe the group very easily. So hopefully you have a group who knows what they're doing. But if you don't, like I said, we have really good tools for just healing everybody through this. There's a lot of AoEs / single target damage. Slink is brilliant for this fight. Ascendance is brilliant for this fight. Like I said, Spirit Walker's Tidal Totem is actually brilliant for that fight as well. I didn't actually end up popping Mana Tide Totem during the 3rd phase, but I absolutely could have again if I needed that cooldown too. So yeah, with all of that in mind, I wish you luck. I hope you enjoy the fight, and I hope these tips helped. All right, thanks. I'll see you next time.